There are films you were never supposed to see, not because they were fake, not because they were offensive in the usual sense, but because they revealed too much about power, about systems, about us. Some of these documentaries disappeared quietly, others were shut down mid-broadcast, a few were released, and then buried, censored, or legally erased. What you're about to hear is not conspiracy. These are real films, real bands, real consequences. And if you manage to reach the end of this video without shivering, you're either braver than most, or you haven't been paying attention. Let's begin. 1. The Silent Scream, 1984. It aired once, and then it was pulled. The Silent Scream was released in 1984, narrated by a former abortion provider, Dr. Bernard Nathanson, a man who claimed to have performed over 75,000 abortions before switching sides. This was his attempt at redemption, or propaganda, depending on whom you ask. The documentary shows an ultrasound of an actual abortion procedure. The fetus appears to scream silently as the instruments approach. That moment became the emotional weapon of an entire movement. Pro-life groups praised the film as undeniable proof of life before birth. Pro-choice advocates condemned it as manipulative and misleading. Medical professionals debated whether the scream was a physiological response or an optical illusion. But the imagery stuck. TV stations pulled the broadcast after public outrage. Schools banned it. Politicians quoted it. And for decades, it shaped the abortion debate like no other piece of media. Even today, The Silent Scream is rarely shown in public forums. It's not just a film, it's a trigger. For anger, for shame, for grief, depending on where you stand. 2. Africa Addio, 1966. It was meant to be a travel documentary, a poetic farewell to colonial Africa. What it became was something else entirely. Released in 1966 by Italian filmmakers Gualtiero Jacopetti and Franco Prosperi, Africa Addio quickly became one of the most controversial films of its time. It didn't just document the end of colonial rule. It captured, in vivid, bloody detail, the chaos that followed, massacres, executions, ethnic cleansing. And the filmmakers were there. Cameras rolling, no filter, no mercy. Some scenes were so graphic, audiences fainted. Others accused the directors of staging violence. Jacopetti claimed everything was real, but critics argued, even if it was, why show it like that? The film was banned in several countries, including Tanzania and Kenya, for portraying Africans as savage and uncivilized. In the US, a heavily edited version was released, but even then, it was condemned by civil rights groups and pulled from some theaters after protests. To this day, Africa Addio is debated. Was it an unflinching look at a brutal reality, or a deeply racist exploitation of African suffering for Western shock value? One thing is certain, you don't walk away from this film the same. 3. Death on the Rock, 1988. In 1988, British television aired a documentary that questioned one of its own government's military operations. Within hours, the backlash was explosive. Death on the Rock investigated the killing of 3 IRA members by British Special Forces in Gibraltar. The official story was simple. They were terrorists, armed and ready to bomb. The soldiers acted fast, neutralized the threat. But the documentary suggested something different. Eyewitnesses claimed the suspects were unarmed. Some said they were shot in the back. Others insisted the operatives fired even after the suspects were down. The film aired on ITV's This Week program. It showed interviews, ballistics experts, sketches, not opinion, just questions. That was enough. The British government accused the show of undermining national security. Some MPs called it treason. Others demanded the journalists be prosecuted, but the public reaction was mixed. Many viewers were shocked. Others were enraged. The debate reached Parliament. Newspapers polarized. And for a time, Death on the Rock was the most talked about and most suppressed documentary in Britain. The journalists behind it faced years of scrutiny. But the footage remains. Not banned completely, just rarely shown, and never without tension. 4. Titicut Follies, 1967. There's a reason this film was banned for over 2 decades. Titicut Follies, directed by Frederick Wiseman, offered something almost no one had seen before. A raw, unfiltered look inside the Bridgewater State Hospital for the criminally insane in Massachusetts. No narrator, no musical cues, just reality. Stark, degrading, and deeply uncomfortable. Inmates, or patients, were stripped naked, force-fed through tubes, mocked by staff, left in isolation, sometimes for days, and the camera watched, quietly, unblinking. When Titicut Follies was screened in 1967, the response was swift and brutal. Authorities claimed it violated patient privacy, but many believed the ban had less to do with privacy and more to do with exposing institutional cruelty that the state didn't want you to see. The film was legally banned from public viewing in the US for 24 years. Wiseman could only show it to educators, lawyers, or professionals with special clearance. For a generation, Titicut Follies became a whispered name, a lost film, a ghost of American justice, until 1991 when the ban was finally lifted. But even now, it's not an easy watch. And maybe that was the point all along. 5. Ghost Watch, 1992. It aired on Halloween night. By the end of the broadcast, thousands of viewers thought they had just watched a real haunting unfold live on TV. Ghostwatch was a BBC mockumentary, but no one told the audience that part clearly. Presented by real British news anchors and journalists, it looked like a live paranormal investigation inside a haunted house, and the details were chillingly realistic. A mother and her 2 daughters claimed they were being terrorized by a poltergeist named Pipes. The broadcast escalated. Objects moved, doors slammed. The hosts were attacked on camera. One presenter vanished, another appeared to become possessed. The BBC received over 30,000 phone calls that night. Some viewers believed people had died live on air. Others had panic attacks. A few reportedly suffered PTSD symptoms. One suicide was later linked to the broadcast. The backlash was immediate. The BBC was accused of traumatizing the public. Despite being fiction, Ghostwatch was banned from rebroadcast for over a decade. It became a cult legend, a cautionary tale about the power of media and the fragile line between fiction and fear. Even today, it's studied in media ethics courses because the scariest part wasn't the ghost, it was how easily people believed. 6. Conspiracy of Silence, 1994. It was supposed to air on the Discovery Channel. It had a scheduled date. Promos were already circulating. And then it vanished. Conspiracy of Silence was a documentary produced in 1994, intended to expose a child sex abuse ring allegedly connected to powerful political figures in the United States. The core of the story centered around the so-called Franklin scandal, a banking fraud case that spiraled into claims of elite-level exploitation, cover-ups, and victims, silenced through threats. The documentary featured interviews with law enforcement officers, journalists, and alleged victims. It raised questions about how deep the rot really went, and who was actively burying it. Just days before broadcast, the program was pulled. The official explanation? Legal concerns. But those involved in the production claimed there was pressure, serious pressure, from individuals in Washington. Copies were ordered destroyed. Somehow, a rough cut survived. It later leaked online and became a grim artifact of what almost got out. To this day, Conspiracy of Silence is a ghost in the media archive, a reminder that sometimes the most disturbing stories aren't fictional. They're the ones you're not allowed to see. Yashishkan 7, Killing for Science, 1976. There are documentaries that disturb you, and then there are ones that make you question your own species. Killing for Science, a British production from 1976, was filmed at Porton Down, the UK's top-secret military science facility. The documentary was never aired publicly, not because it was irrelevant, but because what it showed was almost unbearable. The film documented experiments involving live animals, primarily pigs, used in tests simulating battlefield injuries. Pigs were exposed to mustard gas, nerve agents, and even explosive trauma as part of research into how to treat soldiers in chemical and biological warfare scenarios. The rationale? Pigs' physiology closely resembles that of humans. The goal? To save human lives. But the cost was recorded on film in excruciating detail. Screams, burns, seizures. Technicians calmly noting reactions as the animals collapsed in agony. The footage sparked outrage within the BBC, which had originally commissioned the piece. Several employees refused to continue working on it. The documentary was shelved, not banned by law, just politically buried. It wasn't until decades later that select portions surfaced during ethical debates on animal testing and military secrecy. To this day, Killing for Science remains largely unseen, but those who've watched it say the silence wasn't accidental, it was strategic. 8. Let There Be Light, 1946. It was supposed to help, to show the world what war does to the mind, not just the body. Instead, it was locked away for over 35 years. Let There Be Light was directed by none other than John Huston. Yes, the Hollywood legend. Commissioned by the U.S. Army at the end of World War II, it documented the psychological treatment of American soldiers returning from combat. Men broken by what they'd seen, and even more broken by what they couldn't forget. Shot inside a military psychiatric hospital, the film showed real therapy sessions, real veterans trembling as they spoke, real tears, real trauma, no scripts, no actors, just pain. It was the first time the American public would have seen what we now call PTSD, long before it had a name. But the War Department took one look and said, no, they banned it. Officially to protect the privacy of the soldiers. Unofficially because it didn't fit the victory narrative. These weren't heroes marching home. They were men haunted by invisible wounds. The film remained classified until 1981. Today, it's preserved in the National Film Registry. But for decades, it was hidden. Not because it was false, but because it was too real. 9. Punishment Park, 1971. Technically, it's a fictional documentary, but that didn't stop it from being banned, and it didn't stop governments from feeling uncomfortably seen. Punishment Park, directed by Peter Watkins, is set in an alternate America, but only barely. During the height of the Vietnam War, the film imagines a scenario where dissenters, activists, and draft dodgers are arrested and given two options: serve a long prison sentence, or survive 3 days in a government-run desert training zone called Punishment Park. What follows feels less like fiction and more like a mirror. The film mimics the style of a real documentary. Handheld cameras, unscripted dialogue, non-actors. The trials of the arrested are eerily close to real-life witch hunts. The chases across the desert feel like state-sanctioned executions. When it was released in 1971, Punishment Park was pulled from several theaters. The BBC refused to broadcast it. In the US, the distributor dropped it almost immediately after pressure from unnamed sources. For decades, it circulated underground, passed around in activist circles, studied in film schools, feared by those in power, precisely because it wasn't just a film. It was a warning. Today, Punishment Park is hailed as a masterpiece, but back then, it was treated like a threat. So why were these documentaries banned? Not for being fake, not even for being violent, but because they crossed a line drawn not in law but in comfort. They showed what we're not supposed to see, or what we're not ready to accept. That's what makes them dangerous. Not the footage, the truth. If you've made it this far, ask yourself, what else is out there? What else have we never been allowed to see? And more importantly, why? Let us know in the comments. Which of these shocked you the most? Or have you seen a banned documentary that should have been on this list? And if you want more stories like this, the ones that almost disappeared, yeah, you know what to do.